On the afternoon of November 12th, 2024, on a quiet road at Branch Hill, Guinea Pike, an unexpected traffic accident occurred, drawing the attention of both the police and nearby residents. The victim was none other than Sophia, a 21-year-old woman known for her drama queen personality and a life full of shocking situations. The story of this accident goes beyond a mere traffic incident, unfolding a series of humorous and satirical events involving drunk driving and Sophia's unexpected reactions when dealing with the authorities. "Miss, can you tell me what happened here?" Officer Thompson asked, his voice calm but curious as he surveyed the wreckage of Sophia's car, now lying in a heap of twisted metal and broken glass along Branch Hill, Guinea Pike. He could already tell this was going to be an interesting case. Sophia, with her long, perfectly styled hair that seemed untouched by the chaos around her, dramatically adjusted her oversized sunglasses, which were far too large for her face and not at all suited to the dreary weather. She sighed deeply, clearly preparing herself to deliver what she thought would be an Oscar-worthy monologue. "Well, I was coming home from work," she began, pausing for emphasis. "You know, my job at the, well, I don't really know the name of the place right now," she stammered, eyes darting around as if she might find the answer somewhere in the air. Sophia, with her long, perfectly styled hair that seemed untouched by the chaos around her, dramatically adjusted her oversized sunglasses, which were far too large for her face and not at all suited to the dreary weather. She sighed deeply, clearly preparing herself to deliver what she thought would be an Oscar-worthy monologue. "Well, I was coming home from work," she began, pausing for emphasis. "You know, my job at the, well, I don't really know the name of the place right now," she stammered, eyes darting around as if she might find the answer somewhere in the air. Officer Thompson raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning with each passing second. He had seen a lot of things in his career, but Sophia was taking the concept of dramatic to an entirely new level. Her responses were becoming less coherent by the second, and he couldn't help but wonder if she was genuinely oblivious or just playing the part of a clueless teenager. The scattered debris of her car, combined with her lack of awareness, made the situation even more perplexing. "So, you don't know where you're coming from? You don't know your social security number?" He paused for a moment, letting the absurdity of it all sink in. "But you did leave the scene after almost hitting a sign, only to be found at home later? Is that correct?" he asked, his tone firm but not unkind. His experience told him this wasn't the first time someone had tried to play innocent. Sophia fluttered her hands dramatically, as if the details of the crash were beneath her. "Well, I mean, I didn't mean to crash, officer. It was just, like, so unexpected. I don't even know how I got home, but it was, like, super exhausting. And I was really just trying to get to my couch, you know?" She paused for a moment, as if expecting him to sympathize with her plight. The officer, unfazed, continued his line of questioning, taking note of every word, every gesture, and every suspicious omission. Sophia's erratic behavior, the confusion in her responses, and the abandoned car made it clear that something more was at play than just a simple road mishap. "What about the alcohol?" Officer Thompson asked bluntly, noting the faint scent of liquor on her breath as she spoke. "Have you been drinking today, miss?" Sophia's face immediately froze, and for the briefest moment, the illusion of cluelessness fell away. Her eyes shifted nervously, but she quickly regained her composure. "No, absolutely not," she said with a forced smile, her voice higher pitched than usual. "I don't drink, well, not much, like just a couple of glasses of wine sometimes, but nothing today. I swear!" The officer wasn't convinced, but he wasn't about to let her off the hook just yet. "Okay, miss," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to do some field sobriety tests now, and I suggest you focus on those instead of giving me a performance, all right?" Sophia's lips curled into a pout as she muttered under her breath, "This is so unfair." But she agreed to the tests, clearly unaware of just how much trouble she was about to get into. As the sobriety tests unfolded, Sophia attempted to follow instructions with all the grace of a toddler learning to walk. She tried to follow a pen with her eyes, but her gaze darted wildly, as if she were tracking a butterfly instead of a simple object. The heel-to-toe walk was no better, with her wobbling and swaying like she was in the middle of an impromptu dance routine. Officer Thompson, now thoroughly entertained by the spectacle, glanced at his partner, who was silently chuckling behind his notepad. "Are you sure you don't want to call someone, miss? Because you're not exactly nailing these tests." Sophia gave him a look that could only be described as dramatic exasperation, as though she were being persecuted for no reason. "You don't understand," she huffed. "I'm just tired. It's been such a long day. I'm, really stressed out, okay?" After what felt like an eternity of failed attempts, Sophia stood on one leg, swaying precariously like a tree in the wind. Okay, you win?" She sighed dramatically, as if she had been forced into some tragic Shakespearean play. "Maybe I had a glass of wine? Or 3? But that doesn't mean I'm drunk. I just need to get home and rest." Despite her theatrics, the officer knew all too well what was coming next. He explained her rights clearly, detailing the consequences of refusing the chemical test, including a possible license suspension. Sophia's eyes widened as the reality set in. But she stubbornly crossed her arms and muttered, "Fine, I'll just refuse. But this is ridiculous. You don't even know me." As the officer began filling out the paperwork, he couldn't help but think that Sophia's dramatic performance was one for the books. She might have been 21, but with her refusal to acknowledge reality and constant self-centered antics, she acted like a character out of a soap opera. Unfortunately for her, though, this was real life, and the consequences of her actions would soon catch up with her. Sophia let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she were the victim of some grand cosmic injustice. Her eyes rolled so dramatically they almost seemed to do a full 360. "Ugh, officer, can't you see?" she whined, brushing a lock of her perfectly styled hair behind her ear. "I was stressed. Work is so, hard. And I was just trying to get home to binge-watch my favorite shows. You know, like everyone does after a long day, right?" She waved her hand dismissively, as though she were explaining her actions to a child. Her voice softened, but the tone was no less defiant. "I didn't mean to hit the sign. Who even notices those things anyway? They're everywhere." She scoffed, her lips twisting into a look of disdain. "And, yeah, I left. I'm not going to sit around talking to cops when I could be home relaxing, doing something productive, like scrolling through Instagram or catching up on my skincare routine. You get it, right?" Officer Thompson stared at her for a long moment, his gaze unblinking, his brow furrowed, but his expression remained unreadable. It wasn't his first time dealing with someone who thought they could dodge responsibility with charm, entitlement, and a hint of, "I'm just too cute to care" energy. But Sophia's behavior was particularly over the top, even by his standards. The drama queen act was impossible to miss, from her big sunglasses to her exaggerated hand gestures. "You're 21 years old, Miss Sophia," he said slowly, as if making sure she truly understood what he was about to say. "You understand that crashing and leaving the scene is a big problem here in Ohio, right?" Sophia gave a half-hearted nod, her eyes darting around like she was searching for a way out. Maybe hoping for a fairy godmother to swoop in, or better yet, for the officer to suddenly forget everything he had seen. Yeah, I get it," she said quickly, a touch too quickly. "But it's not my fault. I don't even know what happened. It was a whole thing, and I just needed to get out of there before things got, worse." Her words tumbled out in a rush, but her body language betrayed her. She shifted from foot to foot, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, as if physically barricading herself from the officer's scrutiny. A self-imposed fortress. She was clearly uncomfortable, but not in a way that suggested guilt. No, this was a discomfort born of being caught in a situation where her usual tricks wouldn't work. Sophia wasn't just a 21-year-old with a disregard for the law. She was a product of a world where consequences often felt distant and irrelevant. The entitlement that dripped from her every syllable wasn't just youthful immaturity. It was the kind of attitude that was reinforced every day by social media culture, where filters, likes, and followers could make everything seem like a game. In her world, responsibility was something other people dealt with. Her eyes flicked nervously back to the officer, then to the wreckage of her car. She blinked twice, as if she were still waiting for the moment when things would magically reset. It's just like all these things were happening at once. Work, my friends texting me, my mom calling, and the road was so weird, you know? So I wasn't paying attention. I guess, I didn't think it was such a big deal, okay? The officer nodded slowly, trying to parse her words. He had encountered more than a few people who didn't fully grasp the weight of their actions. But Sophia's mix of confusion, feigned innocence, and stubbornness was, for some reason, making his job feel like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. "Sophia," Officer Thompson said with an exhale, "crashing is one thing, but leaving the scene, that's a crime. It's not something that you can just brush off because you were tired or distracted or, I don't know, stressed, like you said." He emphasized the last part, his patience wearing thin. "You're an adult and you need to own up to it. That's how this works, okay?" Sophia's lips twitched as though she was about to argue further, but she hesitated. The officer's words seemed to sink in, just barely. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Confused, unsure, maybe even a little scared. But only for a moment. Sophia's lips twitched as though she was about to argue further, but she hesitated. The officer's words seemed to sink in, just barely. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Confused, unsure, maybe even a little scared. But only for a moment. Instead of answering, she scoffed again, this time a little louder. "You're seriously, acting like I'm the worst person on earth for, not wanting to sit around talking to cops? Can't you just, let it go? I didn't mean to, okay?" She was trying to shift the conversation away from responsibility, to make the officer see her as the misunderstood young woman she fancied herself to be. But the officer wasn't buying it. "I get it," he said evenly, "but there are real consequences for your actions, and we can't just ignore this. You're in trouble now, whether you think it's fair or not." He paused, letting that statement linger in the air between them. Sophia looked down at the ground, clearly processing what he said, but her face remained locked in a mask of defiance. The truth was, she wasn't used to being held accountable. In her world, things could always be brushed aside, swept under the rug, and forgotten. "I just can't believe this," she muttered under her breath, glancing back at her wrecked car. "I didn't even do anything that bad. It's just a sign. It's not like I hurt anyone." Her voice trailed off, but Officer Thompson, for the first time in the conversation, cracked a small, knowing smile. He had seen this act before. For Sophia, this was a bump in the road. A dramatic interruption in her carefully curated life, where she could pretend nothing ever went wrong. Unfortunately for her, the law wasn't so forgiving. "Well, Miss Sophia, unfortunately that sign's not the only thing that's been hit today," he said, his voice firm, but with just a hint of humor. "We'll see how you handle this from here." Sophia didn't respond, but her expression told him everything he needed to know. She was still trying to figure out how to get out of this mess, but she was beginning to realize this wasn't a situation she could simply escape. The officer's eyes narrowed as he pressed her again, sensing that her excuses were unraveling with every word. "You say you're coming from work, but you don't know where you work or your social security number?" "That's a bit strange, don't you think?" Officer Thompson asked, his voice calm but firm, trying to coax a more coherent answer out of her. Sophia flicked her hair dramatically over her shoulder in an attempt to regain some semblance of composure, but it was evident that the alcohol was beginning to cloud her judgment. Her eyes were unfocused, and her posture swayed slightly as she tried to steady herself. "Ugh. It's just, so hard to keep track of everything when I'm constantly busy," she whined, as though being a 21-year-old in the modern world was somehow a valid excuse for complete forgetfulness. She gave him a look that was equal parts exasperation and incredulity. "And, I'm 21. Not a grown-up yet," she added with a dismissive wave, as if being young and irresponsible were some kind of free pass. Officer Thompson wasn't buying it. He had heard the "I'm too young to know better" excuse 1,000 times before, and it always came from those who thought the world revolved around them. He pressed on. "Well, Miss Sophia, crashing and fleeing is still a crime here," he reminded her, his tone now tinged with authority. "And we are investigating the situation." Sophia's gaze flickered briefly to the ground, as if she were searching for a way to shift the narrative back to safer, more familiar territory. Her lips pursed, and then, in the most dramatic fashion possible, she let out another long, exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes toward the sky, as if the universe itself was conspiring against her. "Fine! Okay," she huffed, her voice rising in pitch. "But can you at least tell me if I can keep my Instagram? It's really important for my brand." It was clear that Sophia's priorities were miles away from the seriousness of the situation. To her, the idea of her brand, which consisted mostly of selfies and filtered rants, was more pressing than the fact that she had just crashed a car, fled the scene, and was now facing legal consequences. Her mind was already on her next post, the caption she'd write to explain away her night, and whether she could still maintain her influencer image without the drama of an arrest hanging over her head. Officer Thompson's patience was wearing thin. He was used to dealing with self-absorbed individuals, but Sophia's mixture of entitlement and childish deflection was starting to grate on his nerves. He leaned in slightly, his nose twitching as he caught a familiar, pungent scent. "Miss, do you smell that?" He didn't wait for her to answer. "Is that alcohol I smell on you?" Sophia's eyes widened to comical proportions as she gasped dramatically, clutching her chest like she had been falsely accused of some unimaginable crime. "What? Me? No way!" she exclaimed, shaking her head so hard her sunglasses nearly flew off her face. "I haven't had a drink in, forever. I mean, okay, I had a glass of wine earlier, but that's not enough to make me drunk, right?" She forced a nervous laugh, but it lacked any real conviction. To anyone with a nose, her slurred speech and unsteady balance were dead giveaways. But Sophia, in all her youthful delusion, seemed to think that a minor glass of wine could explain away everything. Her deflection was as transparent as the wine she had imbibed. Officer Thompson, however, wasn't fooled. His expression remained unamused and his voice was cold. "Well, Miss Sophia," he continued, clearly not entertained by her antics, "we suspect you are intoxicated, and we're going to have to perform some field sobriety tests to confirm that." He gestured toward the open space next to the road. Sophia's reaction was nothing short of theatrical. She rolled her eyes with such exaggerated force that it looked like she might pull a muscle. "Ugh, fine, whatever," she muttered, clearly irritated, but still playing the part of the bored, misunderstood 21-year-old who thought the world was beneath her. "I'm so used to tests. Bring it on," she added, crossing her arms in front of her chest like she was about to face a pop quiz she already knew she'd ace. The truth was, Sophia wasn't used to tests at all. What she was used to was being the center of attention and being treated like the queen of whatever social scene she graced. In her mind, this whole situation was just another bump in the road, a momentary inconvenience she could charm her way out of with enough sass and a few well-placed eye rolls. But Officer Thompson wasn't impressed. He had seen it all before, the bravado, the refusal to take responsibility, and the attempts to manipulate the situation through sheer force of personality. What Sophia didn't understand was that the game had changed. No amount of attitude, dramatic size, or millennial deflection could erase the reality of her actions. The officer wasn't here for a performance. He was here to enforce the law. And Sophia, in all her 21-year-old drama queen glory, was about to learn the hard way that not even the best filter could save her from this mess. The first test, following a pen with her eyes, seemed simple enough, but for Sophia, it felt like a red carpet event. She stood in front of Officer Thompson, the pen dangling in front of her face like a prop in a reality show challenge. With exaggerated movements, she swayed with every tiny shift of the officer's hand, her eyes darting like she was trying to catch an invisible butterfly. "This is, so embarrassing," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with the kind of melodrama that could only come from a 21-year-old influencer used to being the center of attention. She looked around as if the whole thing was some sort of stage, and the camera crew had forgotten to show up. "You're not going to make me do the walking in a straight line thing, are you?" she asked, trying to mask her unease with a flirtatious tone, hoping the officer would cave in. Sophia's idea of a straight line was probably more akin to a squiggly path to a photo op, But walking heel to toe was another matter entirely. Officer Thompson, however, was not swayed by her antics. He nodded firmly, his face set in the no-nonsense expression of someone who'd seen it all before. "It's part of the test, Miss Sophia," he said, with a tone that could freeze a small flame. "We just need you to walk heel to toe. Can you do that? Can you—" Sophia paused for a beat, her eyes narrowing as she considered her options. In her mind, she weighed the choice between her usual deflection and admitting that she had no idea how to walk like that without tripping over her own feet. After a few seconds, she seemed to make her decision. With a dramatic sigh and a huff that could have come from a diva at the Oscars, she lifted her chin and began her attempt at the test. What followed was less of a walk and more of a wobbly penguin shuffle. Her arms flailed, trying to maintain balance, and her heels clicked out of sync as if they had a mind of their own. "Ugh. I mean, I've done way harder things than this at work," she muttered, half to herself and half to Officer Thompson, as though negotiating with a personal trainer. "But sure, I'll play along." To her, this was just another obstacle to overcome, a performance for the officer's benefit. She thought she might earn some points for trying, even if the effort was a comedic disaster. The last test, standing on one leg, seemed to push Sophia into the realm of physical discomfort, and she was clearly growing tired of the charade. The moment she lifted one foot off the ground, she immediately started wobbling like a weeble. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't dignified. It was, however, very on-brand for someone whose balance seemed more dependent on the next Instagram filter than any real coordination. "I mean, this is so basic, officer," she sighed dramatically, her free leg flailing like she was trying to perform a pirouette at the same time. "You know, I could totally do this in, heels. But you guys don't understand fashion," she added, clearly thinking that her discomfort with the test could be spun into a fashion-forward excuse. The officer didn't flinch, even as she gave him a look that suggested he was interrupting her personal runway show. Sophia's need to keep up her persona, to act as though she were the star of some elaborate show, was so deeply ingrained that she genuinely believed she could talk her way out of anything, even sobriety tests. She continued to sway, thinking that her performance could win her some sort of sympathy vote, but Officer Thompson wasn't having it. The officer leaned in, determined to get to the truth. "Okay, Miss Sophia," he said, his voice cool and steady, cutting through her theatrical performance. "Let's talk about that wine again. You sure you haven't had more to drink?" Sophia's eyes widened in an exaggerated display of surprise, almost as if she were being accused of a crime she couldn't possibly have committed. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, looking both defiant and somewhat tired of the whole ordeal. "What? Me?" she said, her tone matching the over-the-top disbelief of a reality show contestant facing elimination. "Okay, fine. I had a glass of wine earlier, but that's it." "Seriously, I'm not drunk." Her voice trailed off with a pout as she wobbled once more, her heel-to-toe walk now forgotten as she balanced awkwardly on one leg. It was clear that she wasn't ready to admit anything yet. Her entire performance screamed that she was more interested in winning sympathy than in taking responsibility. As the tests came to an end, Officer Thompson took a deep breath and shifted into official mode, preparing to lay out the consequences. "If you refuse the chemical test, your license could be suspended for a year, Miss Sophia," he said, his voice unwavering. "You sure about that?" Sophia threw her hands up in the air, as if she were auditioning for a role in a soap opera. "What? A year?" she exclaimed with exaggerated disbelief, eyes wide as if he'd just announced the end of the world. "Seriously? Okay. I'll just refuse it. You guys are such a buzzkill," she snapped, a pout forming on her lips as if she were the one inconvenienced in this entire situation. The officer stood silently for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had seen it all. The dramatic exits, the tears, the excuses. But this was something different. Sophia wasn't just deflecting, she was turning the entire thing into a performance, trying to distract from the fact that she had broken the law, had fled the scene, and was now refusing to take responsibility for her actions. With a flourish that would have made any social media influencer proud, Sophia signed the paperwork, rejecting the chemical test. As she did so, she added a final eye roll, as though this was just another inconvenient chapter in her personal reality show. Officer Thompson shook his head slowly, muttering something about drama queens and the world of social media influencers. his patience officially exhausted. As Sophia strutted away, no doubt planning her next Instagram post with a caption that would somehow twist the whole event into a self-made narrative of resilience, Officer Thompson couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. There she was, 21 years old, refusing to face the consequences of her actions, caught up in a world of filters and likes, with little regard for the reality around her. The drama queen had won the stage, but the law was still standing, and the consequences were not so easily ignored. The story of the 21-year-old girl who was arrested for drunk driving for the second time in a month serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of irresponsibility and the importance of abiding by the law. Through this, we clearly see that a lack of self-control and repeating mistakes can lead to serious repercussions, not only for oneself, but also for the community. The lesson learned is that every individual must have a clear sense of responsibility when participating in traffic and recognize that small decisions, such as drinking before driving, can have significant consequences. Respecting the law and the safety of others is not only a legal obligation, but also a way to demonstrate maturity and community awareness.